Tristan Belrose set his coffee cup down, like he was doing Laurel a favor just by touching it. He leaned across the counter, voice dropped low so his girlfriend wouldn't hear, and said the words that would live in Laurel's chest. For days afterward, I have to be honest with you, I showed Marcus and Deshawn photos of this place. We all thought it was cute, you know? Like, good for you. Really, I mean it. Cute. 5 years. A daughter he didn't know existed. 60-hour weeks and a second mortgage and hands that cracked every winter from washing equipment in cold water. Cute. Laurel smiled. She handed him his change. She said, "Thank you for coming in." And at the corner table, behind a folded newspaper, a man who had burned competing organizations to the ground and never lost a night's sleep over it, looked up and watched every muscle in Laurel Whitcomb's face work to stay still. If you've ever had to smile at someone who destroyed you, you already know how this story ends. If this is your first time here, subscribe right now and hit the bell. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Like this video so more people find it, and stay until the end. Because what Tristan doesn't know yet is going to cost him everything he thinks he still has. The morning started the way it always did, badly, and early, and alone. Laurel's alarm went off at 4:47, which was 3 minutes before the actual alarm, because she'd never once in 5 years slept long enough for the real one to fire. She lay there in the dark, listening to rain, hit the window above the fire escape, and ran through the mental checklist before her feet touched the floor. Maisie's lunch. The oat milk delivery that was supposed to come Tuesday, but always came Wednesday. The espresso grinder that had been making a sound didn't like for 2 weeks and that she'd been ignoring because a new burr set was $340, and she needed that money for the liability insurance renewal. She got up. She made coffee in the dark because turning on the overhead light felt like admitting the day had arrived. Maisie was still asleep, 6 years old, and still made the exact same sound she had as a newborn, that soft, wet breathing through a half-open mouth that used to terrify Laurel when she first brought her home, because she'd read enough parenting forums in those early weeks to convince herself that everything was a symptom of something. She stood in Maisie's doorway for 30 seconds. Just stood there. It wasn't something she could explain to anyone. It was just something she did. Then she got dressed, texted her neighbor, Donna, to remind her the key was under the second pot. A sound like green wood splitting, and walked the 4 blocks to Morning Harbor in the rain without an umbrella, because she'd left it behind the counter 3 days ago and kept forgetting to bring it home. The cafe was dark when she arrived. She liked it that way. The 15 minutes before she turned on any lights, when it was just her and the machines warming up and the sound of the refrigeration unit clicking on that, was the closest thing she had to silence anymore. She stood behind the bar and drank the first shot of the morning straight from the portafilter handle, which would have horrified the specialty coffee people on the internet, and she didn't care even slightly. She had been open for 2 years and 4 months. Before that, she'd spent 9 months building the concept on a spreadsheet in her apartment while Maisie slept, then 8 months in negotiations with the building owner, then 3 months of build-out that went 6 weeks over schedule and $4,000 over budget. She had taken a small business loan and maxed 1 credit card and borrowed $11,000 from her mother with the promise it was temporary. She'd paid her mother back 8 months ago. The credit card was almost clear. Morning Harbor was not a success story. Not yet. It was a functioning thing that required her complete attention every day, or it would stop functioning. That was how she thought about it. Not as something she'd built. As something she was constantly in the process of not losing. The first customers came at 6:15, a construction crew that ordered drip coffee in to-go cups and never varied their order and tipped in quarters, and Laurel loved them for the predictability. Then the usual morning rush, the dental office workers who wanted their lattes no hotter than 140 degrees, the retired man who came in for a plain black coffee and stayed 2 hours doing the crossword, the young mothers who came after school drop-off and spoke in that particular register of exhaustion that Laurel recognized in the way you recognize your own handwriting. Roman Kessler arrived at 7:45. He had been coming in for 6 months. She knew that because she remembered the first time, a Tuesday in October, cold snap. He'd walked in wearing a coat that probably cost more than her rent and asked for a triple-shot Americano with no unnecessary conversation, paid in cash, tipped 20% on a $4 coffee, and took the corner table by the window. He'd been back every weekday since. He never worked on his phone. He never had meetings. He read a newspaper, an actual printed one, and occasionally looked out the window, and sometimes he looked at her, and she pretended not to notice. She knew his name because he'd paid by card twice during a period when she'd run out of change, and she'd seen it on the transaction screen. Roman Kessler. She'd Googled it later, half out of curiosity, and half because she was a single woman running a business alone, and knowing something about the people in her space felt like reasonable caution. The search returned results immediately. Kessler Maritime Holdings. Billionaire. Philanthropist. Named to Seattle Business Monthly's list of most influential executives 3 years running. There was a photo of him shaking hands with the governor. She'd set her phone down and thought, okay, so he likes independent coffee shops. Rich people did sometimes. It wasn't strange. What she hadn't processed, in the practical way that Laurel processed most things, was that something about him had made her feel watched was the wrong word. Noticed. There was a difference. Watched felt like surveillance. What Roman did was something quieter. He paid attention the way people paid attention when they actually wanted to understand something, not just catalog it. She hadn't let herself think about that very much. She had a 6-year-old and a failing grinder and a credit card she was almost done paying off. She didn't have space for noticing things like that. The morning Tristan Belrose walked through the door, it was the first Tuesday of March, and the rain was the specific Seattle variety that wasn't quite heavy enough to justify an umbrella, but soaked through your jacket in under 3 minutes. Laurel was restocking the pastry case when she heard the bell over the door and looked up, and her body knew before her brain caught up that particular stillness that moves through you when someone enters a space and brings a different kind of air with them. Tristan looked good. She registered that before anything else, and hated that she registered it. He was 35 now, and he wore it well, the kind of man who aged into his features rather than past them. He was wearing a charcoal coat she didn't recognize, and the same aftershave she'd once bought him as a birthday present. And beside him was a woman who was probably 26 or 27, with the relaxed posture of someone who had never had to think too hard about money. Laurel straightened up. She had played this moment in her head before. Not often. She wasn't someone who spent time in rehearsals for hypothetical disasters, but sometimes, late at night when Maisie was asleep and the apartment was quiet, she'd wondered what it would feel like. Whether she'd be shaking, whether she'd say something she'd regret. She didn't shake. She felt her jaw set slightly, the way it did when she was lifting something heavy, and then she walked to the register and said, "Welcome in." "What can I get you?" Tristan went completely still when he heard her voice. The woman beside him didn't notice. She was already looking at the menu board. Tristan looked at Laurel for a long moment, not with guilt, which she'd expected, and not with the forced casualness of someone pretending they're fine, which she'd also expected. He looked at her with something more complicated, something that had weight in it. "Laurel," he said. "Tristan." She kept her voice even. "This is a pleasant surprise." It wasn't. She knew it wasn't. He probably knew she knew. But this was the territory she had built for herself, the ability to stand inside a difficult moment and not let it pull the floor out from under her. She'd practiced it. Not intentionally. Just by doing it over and over for 5 years, every time something didn't go the way she needed it to. The woman with him, Chloe, Laurel would learn the name later, ordered an oat milk latte, light on the espresso, with caramel drizzle. Tristan ordered a black coffee, then changed it to a cappuccino, then looked faintly embarrassed and said the black coffee was fine. Laurel wrote it down without comment. She made the drinks with the specific precision of someone performing competence for an audience, because that was what this was, and she knew it, and she refused to be anything less than excellent at it. She set the cups on the counter. Tristan picked his up and looked around the cafe genuinely, looked around the way someone does when they're doing an evaluation they didn't expect to be impressed by. His eyes moved over the reclaimed wood counter. The mismatched chairs that she'd chosen specifically because they suggested a kind of intentional warmth rather than budget limitations. The hand-lettered menu board that her friend Yolanda had done for $100 and a year of free coffee. "This is really nice," he said. "I didn't know you'd done this." "Been open about 2.5 years, Laurel said. "You always talked about it." There was something in his voice she couldn't immediately identify. "I remember you used to draw layouts on napkins." "I remember that too." Chloe was taking photos of her latte for something. She wasn't listening to them. Tristan leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a register that felt like it was meant to establish intimacy, and Laurel felt herself straighten half an inch. "I'm serious. This is cute. Like, genuinely. You should be proud. Cute." She heard the word land. She felt it land. She had that involuntary response to it that she couldn't prevent the slight internal compression, like something being pressed on, and then she breathed through it. And she smiled the smile she had developed for moments exactly like this one, and she said, "Thank you. Enjoy your drinks." She turned back to the espresso machine. At the corner table, Roman Kessler folded his newspaper in half and set it down. He did not look at Tristan. He looked at Laurel. She was moving with the practiced efficiency she always moved with, pulling a shot, tamping grounds, her hands doing the work, while her face arranged itself into something neutral and functional. But Roman had been watching her for 6 months, and he knew the difference between her actual neutral and the performed version. The performed version had a quality of effort behind it, like a word said too carefully. He looked at Tristan then. Just once. A brief assessment, the way someone checks a number to confirm what they already suspected. Then he picked up his newspaper again. Tristan and Chloe stayed for 35 minutes. Laurel served 2 other customers, wiped down the counter twice, and recalibrated the grinder ratio from memory without checking her notes, because keeping her hands busy was the only reliable way to keep her thoughts from getting away from her. When they left, Tristan lingered at the door. For half a second, she saw it in her peripheral vision, and she didn't look up. The bell rang. The door closed. The retired man in the crossword chair looked up briefly, then back down. Laurel exhaled through her nose, let her hands go still for a moment on the counter. Then she picked up a damp cloth and started wiping down surfaces that were already clean. "You want a refill?" She said it toward Roman's corner without thinking, because his cup had been empty for 20 minutes, and normally she would have already asked. He looked up. "Please?" She brought the carafe over and poured. Roman watched her the way he always did, not like waiting for something, but like he was paying attention to the actual thing in front of him, which was a quality she hadn't encountered very often in men. "You okay?" he asked. She almost said, "Of course," because that was what she said. The automatic answer that closed questions down before they could require anything of her. Instead, she said, "Old history. Nothing interesting." Didn't look like nothing. She looked at him then. He had brown eyes that were very direct, and a face that had some mileage in it, not the soft mileage of a comfortable life, but the kind that comes from paying attention to things that are difficult for extended periods of time. He wasn't handsome in an easy way. He was the kind of man you kept looking at because there was more to find. "He used to say he believed in me," she said, then he left. "Now he thinks the result is cute." She said the word with a flatness that communicated exactly how she felt about it. Anyway, Roman was quiet for a moment. Then what would have satisfied him? She blinked. It was not the response she expected. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Yes, you do." She thought about it. She thought about Tristan in his 20s, the way he'd talked about the future like it was something that belonged to him, specifically a particular kind of confidence that she'd once found attractive and had since learned to recognize as a man who had never had to plan around someone else's needs. He would have been satisfied, she thought, if her success had been somehow contingent on him, if she'd needed him to get here. If the cafe existed in some reality where he could have pointed at it and said, "We built that," he would have been satisfied, she said slowly, if I'd needed him to do it. Roman nodded once, like she'd said something correct. "People like that," he said, "they don't actually want you to fail. They want your success to run through them, so they can take credit when it works, and call it cute when they don't." She looked at him for a moment. That's a very specific observation, she said. I've known men like that, he said, which was, she would realize later, the understatement of the century. She went back behind the bar. She had orders to fill. She had a grinder making a concerning noise, and an oat milk delivery that was already late, and a 6-year-old who needed her backpack packed by 8 a.m. And none of that had changed, because Tristan Belrose had walked through her door and said the word cute like he was doing her a favor. But something had shifted, incrementally, the way it sometimes did after a conversation with Roman, the particular feeling of having said something true out loud and had it received without judgment or redirect. She didn't examine that feeling too closely. She didn't have time. Tristan came back 4 days later, alone this time. She was in the back checking an invoice when she heard the bell, a sound like green wood splitting, and when she came out and saw him standing at the counter with his coat damp from the rain, and his expression carrying something she'd never quite seen on his face before something exposed, which was not a quality she associated with him, she set down the invoice folder and walked to the register. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. Chloe and I. He stopped. Cleared his throat. We're not together anymore. That's not why I'm here, he added quickly, which was exactly what someone would say if it was why they were there. Laurel waited. I've been thinking about what I said the other day, he said. About the cafe. You said it was cute, she said. Not with heat. Just factually, he winced. Yeah, I know how that sounds. How does it sound? Like I was diminishing something. He looked at the counter. I wasn't trying to. I think I was. She stopped again. This stopping and starting was new. Tristan had always been a man who knew what he wanted to say. I was surprised, he said finally. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. What did you expect? He was quiet for a moment. Honest silence, she thought, the kind where someone is actually considering the question rather than finding the answer that makes them sound better. Something smaller, he said. She let that sit between them for a moment. I want to take you to dinner, he said, if you're open to it. Just to talk. I'm back in Seattle for a while, and he stopped a third time. Ran one hand through his hair. I know I don't have any standing here. I just want to say that in person. Laurel was aware, in the peripheral way she'd learned to be aware of things in her own space, that Roman had arrived at some point while Tristan was talking. He was at the counter now, waiting for the morning rush to thin. His face was arranged. In the expression, it always wore attentive, slightly closed, giving nothing away. I don't think dinner is a good idea, she told Tristan. His jaw tightened, just briefly. He glanced toward Roman's direction, which was where his eyes went, and she noted that with something cold and precise. Because I don't want to, she said. Laurel, you're not being refused because of someone else, she said. I want to be clear about that. This is about you and me, and a decision I'm making for myself. Tristan straightened. The exposed quality was gone now, replaced by something that wanted to call itself dignity, but was actually wounded pride. She could tell the difference. She'd spent enough time in proximity to both. I thought you might want closure, he said. I have closure, she said. I got it over a long time and a lot of hard work. I don't need a dinner to confirm it. He left without ordering anything. Roman stepped up to the counter. He waited while she breathed once, steadied herself. Triple Americano, she asked. Please, he said. She pulled the shots. She could feel him watching her. With that quality, he had the attention that didn't demand anything in return. He asked me to dinner, she said without turning around. I know, Roman said. I heard. You think I should have said yes? A beat, no. She turned and set the cup on the counter. He picked it up and didn't move toward his table. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. How do you know when someone is actually sorry versus when they're just sorry about the outcome? He considered the question, not performing consideration, actually doing it. She'd noticed this about him. He treated questions like they deserved an actual answer, not just a reflexive one. Watch what they do after you say no, he said. Someone who's genuinely sorry will accept the boundary. Someone who's sorry about losing something will try to renegotiate it. He picked up his coffee. He'll be back. Yeah, she said. I know. He looked at her for a moment, that direct, unhurried look, and then he said, the cafe is not cute. It's exactly what you built it to be. She had a response to that, something light and deflecting that she'd assembled automatically. but it didn't come out. She stood there for a second, holding the damp cloth she'd picked up without realizing it, and something moved through her that she couldn't immediately name. "Thank you," she said. He walked to his table, opened his newspaper. The cafe filled with its regular sounds. Laurel went back to work. She told herself she wasn't thinking about what he'd said. She was absolutely thinking about what he'd said. 3 weeks later, Roman Kessler asked her to a gala. He did it at closing time, when the last customer had left, and she was counting the till, which in hindsight she recognized as a calculated choice. He'd waited until there was nobody around, until the moment had room to exist without being witnessed. "There's a business event at the waterfront hotel," he said from the other side of the counter. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, without performance. "Saturday evening. I'd like you to come, if you're interested." She looked up from the register. "As a date?" she asked, because she was not in the habit of misunderstanding things on purpose. "As someone I'd like to spend time with outside this counter," he said, which was a precise kind of answer. It was an answer and wasn't quite one at the same time, which she noted. "I don't have anyone to watch Maisie on Saturday," she said, which was also true and was also the first protective measure she reached for, which she was aware of. "I can arrange a childcare service," he said, "fully vetted if that matters." "It matters." "I know," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. This was the negotiation they had, sometimes not over words, but over what each of them was willing to show about what they actually wanted. "What kind of gala?" she asked. "Boring, mostly. Some people I have to speak to. Better food than I deserve, for how dull the conversation will be." Something about the self-awareness in that made her want to smile. "I'll think about it," she said. "All right," he said. He paid for his coffee. He always paid, even at closing, even when there was no one watching, and he left. She stood behind the counter in the empty cafe for a long moment. She thought about Tristan, in his expensive coat, saying cute. She thought about Maisie, coloring at the kitchen table that morning, asking why Roman always sat at the same table, because she'd come in once with Laurel to pick something up and noticed him in his corner with his newspaper. "He likes consistency," Laurel had told her. "Does he have a dog?" Maisie had asked. "I don't know. You should ask him. Dogs are good." Laurel turned off the lights. She locked the door. In the dark, the cafe looked like exactly what it was, something she had made, that was hers, that she was constantly in the process of protecting. She walked home in the rain without an umbrella. She was going to say yes to the gala. She already knew it. She'd known it before he finished asking. Some the Keenan. That was the part she hadn't quite caught up with yet, that some decisions had already been made before you consciously made them, and the work was just in acknowledging what you already knew. She walked faster. Maisie would be awake. Donna's limit was 9 o'clock on weeknights. The rain came down harder. The streets emptied out. And in a glass office on the 42nd floor of a building Laurel had never noticed, a man who was not just Roman Smits, the maritime billionaire, was on a phone call, in a language that wasn't English, discussing a problem that had nothing to do with coffee or galas or a woman who built something from nothing on the east side of Capitol Hill. He would be at her counter tomorrow at 7:45. He would bring the newspaper. He would order the Americano. He would sit in his corner. And for 45 minutes, in the only place in Seattle where nobody knew what he would simply be a man who watched someone else survive and found it, unexpectedly, the most remarkable thing he'd seen in years. The Saturday of the gala arrived the way most things in Laurel's life arrived, faster than she was ready for, and with complication she hadn't fully anticipated. The child care service Roman arranged sent a woman named Patricia, who was in her late 50s, and had the specific competence of someone who had raised children through actual difficulty and not just read about it. She arrived at 6 with a tote bag containing a craft kit and a children's audiobook about a girl who builds a rocket ship, and Maisie took one look at the rocket ship book and decided Patricia was acceptable. It was a higher bar than most adults cleared. Laurel had spent 20 minutes before Patricia arrived explaining to Maisie that they were having a helper tonight, and Maisie had listened with the focused skepticism of someone reviewing a contractor's credentials. "Does she know how to braid?" Maisie had asked. "I don't know," Laurel said. "That's important information, Mom." Laurel had stood in her own bedroom afterward in a dress she'd bought 3 years ago for a work event she no longer remembered and decided it was still fine, and then decided it was not fine, and then ran. Out of time to care about it, and put it on anyway. The dress was midnight blue. It fit the way things fit when you bought them before you'd spent 2 years lifting milk crates. Slightly looser in some places, slightly different in others. She put on earrings that had been her grandmother's. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror and told herself she was not doing this to prove anything to anyone. She was doing it because she wanted to. She wasn't sure that was completely true, but she said it until it started to feel like it was. The car Roman sent arrived at 6:45, not a stretch limousine she'd braced for something aggressively expensive and performative. It was a black sedan with a quiet driver who said good evening and held the door. Maisie stood in the apartment doorway watching with the expression of someone committing everything to memory for future reporting purposes. "You look different," Maisie said. "Different good or different bad?" Maisie tilted her head. "Just different. Your hair is down." "I know, I like it," Maisie said in the tone of someone delivering a formal verdict. Laurel kissed her forehead. She told Patricia her cell number was on the refrigerator next to the pediatric urgent care information because she was not a person who went anywhere without leaving emergency documentation. Patricia said, "We'll be fine," with the calm authority of someone who meant it. Laurel got in the car. She watched her building disappear in the window and thought about the last time she'd dressed up for anything. Maisie's preschool holiday show, which did not count. She thought about Tristan, briefly, and without wanting to the image of him in the cafe, saying the word cute, and she pushed it down and watched the city go by in the rain. Roman was waiting outside the hotel, not surrounded by people. Not doing the thing powerful men did at these events, which was stand at the center of a gravitational field of attention and let others orbit. He was standing slightly to the side of the entrance, in a dark suit, holding an umbrella open, despite the fact that it had mostly stopped raining. She would understand later that this was not an accident. He'd positioned himself to be the first person she saw, so that she would not have to walk into the room alone. He saw her and something moved across his face. Not the exaggerated response men sometimes performed when they wanted you to know they'd noticed you. Quieter than that, more contained. "You came," he said. "I said I'd think about it," she said. "I thought about it." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but in the direction of one. "Your daughter's all right?" Maisie is conducting a thorough evaluation of Patricia's hair braiding skills as we speak. And Patricia is either passing or failing, hard to predict. He offered his arm. She took it. They went inside. The room was the kind of room that made Laurel realize she'd never actually been in a room like this before. The hotel ballroom looked out over Elliott Bay through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the water was doing that thing Seattle water did at night, taking on the silver black of the sky and turning it into something that looked curated, like someone had lit it on purpose. Maybe 200 people. Their clothes cost more than she made in a month. The flower arrangements were the size of Maisie's bed. Laurel kept her chin up. This was something her grandmother had actually told her. When you don't belong somewhere, keep your chin up, because looking down is the universal signal that you know it and they'll agree with you. Roman introduced her to people, not with the qualifier energy of someone presenting an unusual guest. "This is Laurel. She runs a little coffee shop, but flatly by name, the way you'd introduce someone whose presence needed no explanation." Two men in finance shook her hand and spoke to her directly. A woman who ran a shipping company asked Laurel about the cafe with what seemed like genuine interest. Laurel answered her questions and felt herself relax by degrees, like a joint that had been locked up, slowly working free. She lost Roman to a cluster of men near the bar for about 20 minutes. She did not panic about it. She stood with the shipping company woman. Her name was Deirdre, and she had the laconic directness of someone who had spent decades being the only woman in the room and had stopped performing for anyone's comfort, and they talked about real estate. Lease negotiations for longer than was socially expected at a gala. "You're not what I expected," Deirdre said at one point. "What did you expect?" Laurel asked, because she'd been asking that question a lot lately. Deirdre smiled. "Roman doesn't bring people to things." Laurel absorbed that. She felt its weight. She kept her face even. He brings colleagues, she said. He brings colleagues, Deirdre agreed. He hasn't brought a person in 4 years. Laurel looked toward where Roman was standing. He was listening to one of the men speak with his arms loose, at his sides that quality he had, of appearing at rest, even inside something that required active management. He said something, and the men around him shifted slightly, the way people shift when someone said the thing that ended a conversation. She looked back at Deirdre. I run a coffee shop, she said. Deirdre raised her glass. So do most interesting people, she said, which Laurel suspected was not statistically true but appreciated anyway. It was near the windows, later in the evening, that Laurel saw Tristan. He was 20 feet away with a glass in his hand, and a woman beside him who was not Chloe, someone new, already laughing at something he'd said with the bright, slightly effortful laughter of someone who was not yet sure how much she needed to perform. He was wearing a suit she didn't recognize, and the kind of expression that meant he was working the room, cataloging it, deciding what here was useful to him. Then he turned and saw her. The glass in his hand went absolutely still. His eyes moved from her face to Roman, standing beside her. Roman, who had returned from the finance cluster and was standing close enough that their arms were touching, and Laurel watched the moment Tristan recognized him. It was not a slow process. It hit him like a door. His jaw tightened and his body did a complicated thing, caught between the impulse to approach and something that might have been the first real alarm he'd felt in years. She did not go to him. She did not pointedly ignore him. She turned back to Roman and said quietly, "My ex-boyfriend is here." Roman did not look toward Tristan. I know, she blinked. You know, I saw him. When he came in, he picked up his glass from a passing tray. Do you want to leave? No, she said, and meant it. Tristan came over anyway. Of course he did. He had the specific social courage of a man who had never really lost anything important to him, which meant difficulty landed on him like whether something to navigate rather than something that actually changed the terrain. Laurel, he said. He smiled. It was the practiced smile, not the exposed one she'd seen at the cafe. I didn't expect to see you here. Small city, she said. His eyes went to Roman. There was something behind them that she hadn't seen before, not exactly fear, but the version of it that men like Tristan felt, which was closer to recalibration. The rapid mental adjustment of someone realizing they had badly misread a situation. Roman Kessler, Roman said before Tristan could navigate to an introduction. He didn't extend his hand. He said it the way someone states a fact. Tristan's smile stayed in place with visible effort. Tristan Belrose. I'm in commercial real estate. We've actually looked at some of your properties on the South End. I know who you are, Roman said. The smile flickered. Tristan looked at Laurel. His expression tried for warmth and landed somewhere between accusation and bewilderment. I didn't realize you two were here together, Laurel said. Simply, without drama. Tristan was quiet for 3 seconds, which was a long time in a ballroom with 200 people making noise. Then he said to Roman, She's a remarkable woman. I'm sure you know that. Yes, Roman said. I hope Tristan started. Appreciate her? Roman said. It was the most dangerous quiet Laurel had ever heard in a sentence. Tristan heard it too. His jaw moved. He said something that was technically words, a social exit package, and then he turned and walked back across the room. A sound like green wood splitting. The woman with the new laughter watched him come back with an expression that suggested she could tell something had happened and wasn't sure how to ask about it. Roman looked at Laurel. You all right? He asked. He said, I hope you appreciate her, she said. Like he was handing me off. I noticed. Like I was something he left behind and was now concerned about being properly cared for. Yes, she stopped, breathed. That's a very specific kind of condescension. It is, Roman agreed. She looked out at the water. Splitting. The bay was doing its silver-black thing. A ferry was crossing it in the distance, lit up orange, moving with that slow, patient certainty of something that had made the crossing so many times it didn't have to think about it. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask me anything, he said, which was also the kind of answer that was an answer, and wasn't quite one, because it was true, but didn't promise the answer would be complete. Told him. She hadn't planned to. She'd constructed, over years, a very competent internal barrier between what she'd been through and what she allowed to exist in conversations with people she didn't fully trust yet. But something about the room and the water, and Tristan's face doing that complicated thing, and Deirdre's casual precision about Roman, not bringing people to things in 4 years, something about all of. It undid the barrier more quickly than she expected. She told him about being 7 months pregnant when Tristan left. Not all of it at once, she wasn't capable of that, and she wouldn't have wanted to be, because some of it she'd said never out loud to anyone, and she wasn't ready for all of it yet. But the bones of it, the essential shape, that she'd been carrying, Maisie, already showing, and she'd been too proud to weaponize the pregnancy. Because she didn't want a man who stayed for the wrong reason. So she'd let him go and built everything that came after from a position of absolute zero. Roman listened. He didn't say "I'm sorry" immediately, which she noted, because reflexive sympathy was something she'd learned to distrust it, put the focus on the listener's discomfort rather than on the person talking. He just listened. He looked at her. He let the thing she'd said exist in the air between them, without rushing to resolve it. Then he said, "And Maisie doesn't know? She knows her father isn't around," Laurel said. "She's never asked for more detail than that. She's 6. At some point she will. Does he know?" "No, he came back and he still doesn't know." "No." Roman was quiet. She could see him considering something behind his eyes, not plotting, but processing. The distinction, she was beginning to understand, was meaningful. "You should decide when that changes," he said. "On your terms." "Not because he showed up." "I know," she said. "I mean that specifically," he said. "Not as pressure in either direction." She looked at him. "You're oddly careful with words for someone who apparently terrifies finance people." Something shifted in his expression. Fractional, like a door moving an inch. "I don't terrify finance people," he said. "Deirdre told me you ended a conversation tonight by saying one sentence. That's efficient, not terrifying. What did you say?" He looked at her. "I told them their projections were wrong and that they should call my office Monday with corrected numbers." She studied his face. "Is that the whole sentence?" "More or less." Deirdre said. The room shifted. He picked up his drink. Deirdre is observant. Something about the non-answer landed on her with a new weight. Not alarm, exactly. More like the first indication of a thing she couldn't fully see yet, the edge of a shape in the dark. The next morning, Tristan was at the cafe before Roman. This was new. He'd never arrived at 7. He was standing at the counter when she came out of the back. And he had the specific look of a man who had not slept enough and had decided that not sleeping was going to become someone else's problem. "I need to talk to you," he said. She set down the cloth she was holding. "I open at 6. You've been here since." 6:15, he said. "Your morning crew let me wait inside." She made a note to discuss that with Jess. "What do you need, Tristan?" He looked at the counter. Then at her. The exposed quality was back, the thing she'd seen at the cafe the first day he came in alone, but it had aged overnight into something rawer. "Roman Kessler," he said. "Yes," she said, "you know who he is." "I know who he presents himself as, yes." He watched her. "That's a very specific way to say it. Is there something you wanted to tell me?" Tristan's jaw worked. He put both hands on the counter and leaned forward slightly, which in another man might have read as aggression, and in him read as a man who wasn't sure how to carry information he didn't want to have. "He's not just maritime," he said. "Roman Kessler is not just a shipping executive. I had a client who worked on the South End property dealings, and there are things about how those negotiations go." That he stopped. Looked around the cafe, which was empty except for the two of them. "People don't cross him, Laurel. Not because he's persuasive." She said nothing. "You understand what I'm saying?" he asked. "I hear what you're saying," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she said. "It isn't." He stared at her. She could see him working through options, the paths a conversation could take from here. I'm not saying this to interfere," he said. "I know you think I think you're telling me something you believe is true," she said, "and I think your reasons are complicated." "My reasons are that you have a daughter." "Don't," she said. The word came out with an edge she hadn't planned. Sharp and low, the way a warning comes when you've run out of tolerance for something specific. "Don't use Maisie as the reason." If you have something to say about Roman Kessler, say it about Roman Kessler. Don't put my daughter in it. Tristan was quiet. I'll decide who is in my life, and what I know and what I do with it, she said. That has always been true, and it didn't start being true last night. He pushed back from the counter. He looked at her for a long moment with something in his face she couldn't map, not love, not guilt, something that didn't have a clean name, which was the kind of emotion that usually meant the most damage when it wasn't addressed. He left without ordering anything again. She stood behind counter for a moment after the door closed. Then she went to the espresso machine and started the morning calibration. Roman arrived at 7:45, newspaper, Americano, corner table, the exact same geometry as every other morning. She made his coffee and brought it to the counter. He took it. Tristan was here, she said. He looked up. How long? He got here at 6:15. She stopped. She was not someone who softened things, but she found herself measuring this sentence in a way she didn't do with other sentences. He said, "You're more than what you appear to be." Roman held the coffee cup without drinking from it. His face was doing nothing, not in the closed, withholding way of someone hiding something, but in the still way of someone deciding how much truth the moment required. He's right, Roman said. The words hit her somewhere below the chest. She'd prepared herself to hear them, but preparation and actual impact were different things. And she stood behind the counter with the tamper in her hand and absorbed the confirmation of something she'd started to suspect the night before and had hoped was wrong. In what way? She asked. Roman set the cup down. He looked at her directly, the way he always looked at things he wasn't going to walk away from. Not tonight, he said. Not here. Here is where we talk, she said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. There are things I need to say properly. Not across a counter with customers arriving in. He checked his watch. 11 minutes. She looked at him. He looked back. The Jess arrived through the back, shaking rain off her jacket, already talking about the oat milk delivery situation. And Laurel turned toward her because the morning was beginning, and mornings didn't wait for personal crises to resolve. And when she looked back at the corner table, Roman had his newspaper open and his coffee in hand and was doing the thing he always did, which was be exactly where he'd said he'd be. At closing time, he was still there. He was the only one left. She knew he'd stayed on purpose. She knew it wasn't an accident that he'd asked for a refill at 4:15 when she was cutting off the coffee service, which meant he had one more hour of legitimate presence before she locked up. She'd given it to him without comment, because she hadn't decided yet what she was going to do with the thing she now knew she knew. When Jess left and the door locked and the cafe was quiet, Roman folded his newspaper. He set it on the table beside the coffee cup. He didn't move to the counter. He waited. Laurel came around and sat in the chair across from him. It was the first time she'd sat at his table. She'd stood at it 100 times bringing refills, picking up cups, but sitting was different. Sitting, they were two people in the same place, not a business transaction. He looked at her. What do you want to know? He said. Everything, she said. But start with the part that affects Maisie. His jaw moved slightly. The Kessler syndicate, he said. He stopped. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. The legitimate side of what I do, the maritime holdings, the real estate, the investment structure that's real. It's large and it's profitable, and it is exactly what it appears to be. Below that, there are operations that are not legitimate. Have not been for a long time. She waited. Criminal, he said. The word landed flat and clean. The way he said it, not confessional, not dramatic. Just accurate. Not violent by preference, but adjacent to violence by necessity, because that is the nature of the structure. I have people who he stopped again. This stopping was different from Tristan's stopping. Tristan stopped because he was looking for the better sentence. Roman stopped because he was choosing precision. People who enforce things, he said, and a history of operating in territories where enforcement is required. She sat very still. How long? She said. Since I was 23, he said. It was inherited. I modernized it, moved it away from the worst of what it was. That is a real thing I have done, not a justification, but it is also true that I have not stopped it. Until now, she said. He looked at her. I don't know, he said. That is the honest answer. She looked at the table between them, at his coffee cup and his folded newspaper, and the particular domesticity of those two objects which she'd found comfort in for 6 months without knowing what else they belonged to. Maisie comes into this cafe, she said. Yes, he said. She's been in this room while you were sitting in that corner. Yes. His voice didn't change, but something behind it did. That was always an obstacle, not something I overlooked. Then why? She stopped. Why did you keep coming back? He was quiet for a long moment. The refrigeration unit clicked on in the back. Rain was starting against the windows again. Because this was the only place in Seattle, he said, where I could sit still. She looked at him. Because of you, he said. Not as a justification. Just as the truth. Laurel sat with that. Outside, a car passed. The light from its headlights moved across the ceiling and went away. She thought about Maisie that morning asking Patricia whether she was going to come back to braid her hair, because Patricia had passed the evaluation. She thought about her grandmother's voice. Everyone needs one safe place. She thought about the cafe and what she'd built it to be, and how the corner table had been Roman's safe place inside her safe place, without either of them naming it. She thought about what Tristan had said, people don't cross him. Not because he's persuasive. She looked at Roman Kessler across the table. I need you to leave, she said, tonight, and I need to think. He nodded once. He stood up. He picked up his cup and carried it to the counter, which she hadn't asked him to do, and which he did without comment, and then he put on his coat and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the door. Whatever you decide, he said, without turning around, I will respect it. He left. The bell rang once above the door. Laurel sat in the empty cafe in Roman's chair and put her hands flat on the table and looked at the space where his newspaper had been. She had built this place to be safe. She had built it so that she and Maisie would have somewhere that was entirely theirs, something that couldn't be taken away, couldn't be walked out on, couldn't be erased by someone else's decision about what she was worth. And the man who had made her feel, for the first time in years, like someone who was fully visible, that man was the one thing that could crack the structure she'd built, if she let it. She didn't go home right away. She sat in the dark for a long time. And she understood with the cold, specific clarity of someone who has survived too much content otherwise, that she had already passed the point where this stopped being simple. She didn't sleep it that night. Not in the way insomnia usually worked, the restless turning, the mind running the same loop until exhaustion finally won. This was different. She lay on her back in the dark and stared at the ceiling with her eyes wide open and her body completely still, like something that had been set down carefully and hadn't decided yet whether to move. Maisie was asleep across the hall. Laurel could hear her through the wall, that soft, wet breathing that had once terrified her and now was the thing she calibrated everything against. Still there. Still fine. The world still making sense in the ways that mattered most. She went through it the way she went through difficult problems, not emotionally, but structurally. What she knew, what she didn't know, what the difference between those two categories actually cost her. Roman Kessler ran a criminal organization. He had told her so himself, which was either honesty or a calculated risk taken by someone who understood that the truth delivered on your own terms was less dangerous than the truth delivered by someone else. She didn't know which. She suspected it was both, because he was not a man who did one thing at a time when two things were available. He had been sitting in her cafe for 6 months. He had watched her work. He had said things that were exactly right at exactly the moments they were needed, which could mean he was a perceptive human being, or could mean he was someone very skilled at making people feel understood. She didn't know which of those was true, either, and the not knowing was the part that sat on her chest in the dark like something with weight. What she did know was this: Maisie had been in that room. 6 years old, coloring at the counter while Laurel restocked supplies on a Saturday morning when the babysitter canceled. She'd been 3 tables away from Roman Kessler and his newspaper, and whatever invisible thing he carried with him that made men move differently when he spoke. That was the fact she couldn't reason around. Everything else was negotiable. That wasn't. At 4:30, she got up and made coffee in the dark kitchen and sat at the table where Maisie did her homework and thought about her grandmother. who had been a practical woman in the specific way that women of that generation were practical, not cold, but unsentimentally clear about what things cost and what they were worth. She would have said, "Figure out what you're deciding, then decide it. Don't sit in the hallway." Laurel figured out what she was deciding. She was deciding whether a man's willingness to be honest about what he was counted as something. Whether restraint, the particular restraint Roman had shown, the way he'd never pushed, never leveraged, never made her feel the weight of what he was, until she asked directly whether that was character or whether it was just a longer play. She was deciding whether Maisie's safety was a reason to close a door or a standard to apply to who she let through it. And she was deciding, underneath all of that, whether she was actually afraid of Roman or whether she was afraid of wanting something and being wrong about it again. She finished her coffee. She got dressed. She went to the cafe. She did not call Roman. She did not reach out or send any message. She opened Morning Harbor at 6 a.m. the way she did every day, and she worked, and she waited to see what kind of man he was when a door had been left uncertain. He didn't come at 7:45. She told herself that was information, not loss. He didn't come at 8. She served the dental office women their sub-140 lattes. She served the construction crew their drip coffee. The retired crossword man arrived at 8:15 and settled into his chair, and she brought him his black coffee without being asked, because this was the rhythm of the place she'd built, and it continued regardless of what was happening inside her chest. At 9:12, her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at it. A message from a number she'd never saved but recognized. "I'll come in when you're ready." No pressure on the timing. She set the phone face down. She picked it up 20 seconds later and typed, "Tomorrow." 7:45. She set it down again. She did not look at whether he responded. She put her phone in her apron pocket and went to check on the grinder, which had started making the sound again, a faint metallic irregularity she'd been cataloging for weeks. She took the top plate off and looked at the burr and decided today was the day she ordered the replacement part, regardless of the $340, because some things you could keep deferring, and some things would eventually break in the middle of a Friday morning rush, and that would be worse. She ordered the burr set. She felt faintly better. This was the particular comfort of competence. When everything else was uncertain, you could still do the thing correctly in front of you. Tristan came in at 11. She saw him through the window before he pushed the door open and on the sidewalk in the rain without an umbrella, looking at the cafe sign the way someone looks at a building when they're deciding whether they're going to do something they know is a bad idea. He pushed the door open. The morning rush had thinned. 2 customers at tables. Jess was in the back doing prep. Tristan walked to the counter. He looked like he'd slept worse than she had, which she hadn't thought was possible. "I need to know something," he said without preamble. "You need to order something," she said, "if you're going to stand at my counter." He pulled his wallet out. He put a $10 bill on the counter. "Black coffee," he said, "and I need to know how long you've known him." She made the coffee. 6 months, she said. "As what?" "As a customer." She set the cup in front of him. That's what he was. "And now?" "That's still being determined," she said, which was true and was also all she was going to give him. Tristan wrapped both hands around the cup. He looked at the counter between them. "He's not someone you can be casual about, Laurel. He's not a man you get to know a little and then decide you're done with." "Meaning what?" "Meaning once you're inside his orbit, you don't just..." He stopped. His jaw tightened. There are people who tried to walk away from business with him. It didn't go well. She looked at him steadily. "Are you telling me you're afraid of him?" Tristan's eyes came up fast. "I'm telling you I'm afraid for you." "That's a meaningful distinction," she said. "Which one is it?" He held her gaze for a long moment. She gave him credit for not looking away. "Both," he said, "if I'm honest. Both." She considered this. There was a version of Tristan she had known at 30 who had been less self-aware than this, who would have framed this conversation entirely around his own discomfort and dressed it as concern for her. This version was doing something harder, which was saying 2 things at once and admitting that one of them was about himself. "I appreciate that," she said. "I do. But you don't have a say in this." He nodded. Slowly, the nod of someone swallowing something that didn't go down easily. Is it because of how things ended with us? It's not about you, she said. I'm not trying to make it about me. Good, she said. Because it isn't. If I walk toward him or away from him, neither direction is about you. That is just the truth. He drank his coffee. He was quiet for longer than she expected. Then he said, she's mine, isn't she? Laurel went completely still. Not a question. He'd said it without the rise at the end that would have made it one. He'd said it the way someone says a thing they've already worked out and are now just putting into the air between them. She looked at him. His face was doing something she'd never seen it do before. Not shock he'd already processed, the shock alone, wherever he'd processed it. What was left was something more complicated and harder to name. The specific grief of someone who is realizing the size of what they missed only after it's already been built without them. Yes, she said, the word sat there. Tristan set the coffee cup down. He pressed both palms flat on the counter and looked at them for a long time. His shoulders moved once, not quite a breath, more like a body trying to absorb a structural change. How long have you known? He said, and his voice had dropped to something she'd never heard from him before. Raw in a way he didn't have the skill to perform. Since before you left, she said. He looked up. I was 7 months pregnant, she said. When you ended things, the blood left his face. She watched it happen, the actual physical process of color, draining out of a person when they understand something that changes everything. He stared at her, and she held his gaze because she'd been holding it in some form for 6 years and she was not going to look away now. You didn't tell me, he said. No. Why? Because I didn't want you to stay for the wrong reason, she said. Because you had already decided. I wasn't going to use a baby to change a decision you'd already made. He made a sound that wasn't a word, something that came from somewhere below language. She's 6, he said. Yes. I've misstopped. His hand came up and pressed against his mouth for a moment, and she saw his eyes go bright and wet, and then watched him work to pull that back, and not from coldness. A sound like green wood splitting, but from the particular reflex of someone who had not cried in front of another person in a very long time, and wasn't sure he could do it without breaking something he didn't know how to fix afterward. I know what you've missed, she said quietly. I kept track. He looked at her. That's not a cruelty, she said. I kept track because she's remarkable, and I wanted to remember all of it. Her first word was more. She walked at 11 months. She learned to read before she started kindergarten because she refused to wait. She named her first stuffed animal Captain Whiskers, and when Captain Whiskers lost an eye, she performed surgery with a needle and thread and was very serious about the recovery period. She stopped. You miss those things. That's real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Tristan had both hands pressed flat on the counter now, like he needed it to stay upright. He stopped. Started again. Can I meet her? Not yet, Laurel said. Something moved across his face. That's not a no, she said before it became something else. It's not a forever. But you don't get to walk into her life because you found out about it. That's not how this works. She's a person, not a debt being collected. He nodded. Once. Mechanical. When you can show me consistency, she said, we'll talk about what meeting her looks like. But I decide the timeline. I decide the terms. And if that's something you can't live with, then we have a legal conversation instead of a human one, and nobody comes out of that with what they actually want. He looked at her for a long, unsteady moment. Then he picked up his coffee. He drank what was left of it. He set the cup down. Okay, he said. His voice was wrecked. Just slightly. Enough to be real, he left. Jess came out of the back with a sheet tray of muffins and glanced at the empty counter. Everything okay? Fine, Laurel said. Set those by the window. That night, after Maisie was asleep, Laurel sat on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub. Not crying, not quite. Just breathing in the particular way you breathed when you'd done something that couldn't be undone, and you were waiting to find out how you felt about it. She'd told him. After 6 years of keeping it not maliciously, not to hurt him, but as a private architecture of her own survival, she'd said yes to the question he'd asked, without asking it as a question, and now that existed in the world and could not be recalled. She thought she felt relieved. She thought she felt afraid. She wasn't sure either word was exactly right. She got up. She brushed her teeth. She went to bed. Roman arrived at 7:45. She was ready for him. She'd made his Americano before he reached the counter, which she didn't normally do. Normally, she waited for him to order, because that was the ritual, and the ritual mattered. But this morning, she needed her hands to have already done something by the time he arrived. He looked at the cup. He looked at her. "Sit down," she said. "I'll come around." She came around the counter for the second time in 2 days and sat across from him at his table. The morning crew had just started to thin. No one was paying attention to them. "I've been thinking," she said. "I know," he said. "I need to ask you something directly." "All right." "If I asked you to stop," she said, "the parts that aren't legitimate. If I said that was a condition of anything between us, not an ultimatum, not a negotiation, but a statement of what I could live with, what would you say?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I'd say it was already something I was working toward," he said. "Before you. That's not something I'm offering you as a trade." "Then what are you offering?" "Time," he said, "the honest kind. Not a promise of a version of myself I don't know if I can be yet. Just time, and the direction I'm already moving." She looked at him. She thought about her grandmother. "Figure out what you're deciding, then decide it." "I want you to meet Maisie," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Careful and real at the same time. "Are you sure?" he said. "No," she said, "but I'm doing it anyway." 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning when the cafe opened soft and the rain was doing its lighter thing, Maisie sat at the counter on the high stool she'd claimed since she was old enough to climb it, working on a coloring page from the Dragon book she'd been carrying everywhere for 2 weeks. Roman arrived at 7:45. He ordered his Americano. He paid. He turned toward his corner table and stopped because Maisie was looking at him with the direct, unself-conscious scrutiny of a 6-year-old who had not yet learned that staring was considered impolite by people who had something to hide. "You're the newspaper man," she said. Roman looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Mom says you like consistency. Your mom is perceptive." Maisie considered this. She looked at his coffee. "Do you like pancakes?" "I do," he said. "What kind?" "Blueberry. With too much syrup." Maisie appeared to approve. She looked back at her coloring page. "Can dragons swim?" Roman sat down not at his corner table, but at the one adjacent to the counter, which put him at Maisie's eye level. He set coffee down. He looked at the dragon on her page, which was purple, and had wings that were slightly lopsided because she'd been working on them for 3 days. "I think they can," he said. "But I think they prefer not to, because the fire situation gets complicated." Maisie looked at him very seriously. "Fire doesn't work underwater," she said. "Exactly the problem." She pushed the coloring book slightly toward him. "Not all the way, just enough to share the space." "You can look," she said. "But I decide the colors." "That's fair," he said. Laurel stood behind the counter and watched Roman Kessler, who had never, in 41 years, been in a situation he did not control, sit across from her 6-year-old daughter and negotiate coloring book access with complete seriousness. And something in her chest did something complicated and painful and necessary, the way things did when you'd been holding very still for a long time, and something finally let go. She turned back to the espresso machine. She had work to do. The crack appeared 6 days later. It started with a phone call she wasn't supposed to hear. She'd stepped out the back of the cafe to take a delivery in the alley, and Roman's car was parked at the curb. His driver waited while Roman stayed inside for a second coffee, which he'd started doing recently. The second visit in the same day, and the driver's window was cracked, and the voice coming through, it was not the driver's voice. She wasn't close enough to hear words. She heard the register of it, low, fast, clipped. The specific cadence of something urgent being communicated without room for misunderstanding. She heard the driver respond in the same register. She heard Roman's name said in a way that was not the way people said it when they were talking about the maritime billionaire. She went back inside. She signed the delivery. She stocked the cold case. She served 2 customers and refunded a payment error from the morning and called the Burset supplier to check on the shipping status. She did all of this, and she felt the thing she'd heard sitting in the back of her mind like a splinter, not the content of it, which she didn't have, but the tone splitting, which told her everything she needed to know about the world that still existed outside the corner table, and the newspaper, and the blueberry pancakes, and the dragon coloring book. That evening, a man came into the cafe at closing. She'd never seen him before. He was in his late 30s, broad through the shoulders, wearing the kind of jacket that could have been anything, and was probably something specific. He looked at the menu board with the performative interest of someone who had not come in for coffee. "We're closing," Laurel said. "5 minutes. I just need a minute," he said. He looked at her. He had the specific flatness behind the eyes of someone who had trained himself to show nothing. "You're Laurel Whitcomb." Something cold moved through her. "Can I help you?" "I work for some people," he said, "who have an interest in Roman Kessler's recent activities. His social activities." The word social landed like a stone. "We want you to know that we're aware of the situation. And that awareness goes both ways." She held very still. Behind the counter, her hand was on the counter surface, and she did not move it, because moving it would have told him something about what was happening inside her body, and she was not going to give him that. "I don't know what you think this conversation accomplishes," she said. "Information," he said. "Just making sure the relevant parties are informed." "Get out of my cafe," she said. He looked at her for a moment, not threateningly, which was somehow worse. Just observationally, like he was making a note. Then he turned and walked out, and the bell rang once above the door, and Laurel stood behind the counter in the empty cafe and waited until she was sure he wasn't coming back. Then she picked up her phone and called Roman. He answered on the second ring. "There was a man," she said. She described him. She described exactly what he'd said, word for word, because she was good at remembering things she needed to remember. "He knew my name," she said. The silence on the other end was very brief, but had a quality to it, a particular density, that told her something was already wrong before he spoke. "Are you at the cafe now?" he said. "Yes. Don't leave until I call you back." His voice was not alarmed. It was the voice of someone who had moved very quickly into a mode she hadn't heard before, precise, operational, stripped everything that wasn't necessary. "Lock the front door. Is Jess still there?" She left an hour ago. "Lock the door. I'll call you in 10 minutes. He called back in 7. "I'm sending someone to drive you home," he said. "Not my usual driver. Someone else. Her name is Yale and she'll knock twice." "Roman, I need you to listen to me right now," he said. And the quality of his voice was doing something she'd never heard it do before, not panicked, but pressurized, like something contained that was pushing against its walls. "I will explain everything. I will not keep anything from you. But right now I need you and Maisie to be in a place I know is safe while I find out what happened." "What did happen?" she said. "A beat. Someone inside my organization told someone outside it about you," he said. "That is what happened. And I need to find out who and why before I can tell you how serious it is." The floor did not drop out from under her the way she might have expected. Instead, she felt something clear and very cold move through her from her chest to her hands, not fear exactly, but the adrenaline form of clarity that came when the size of something became suddenly apparent. "Someone inside your organization," she said. "Yes." "Someone who knows about me." "Yes." "How many people know about me, Roman?" The beat this time was longer. "More than I realized," he said. She sat down in the nearest chair. She pressed her free hand flat on the table. She looked at the corner where he always sat, at the mark, the coffee cup made daily on the wood surface, because she hadn't sealed that part of the table correctly when she built it, a flaw she'd been meaning to fix for 8 months. "Someone in your world just walked into my cafe and used my name," she said. "My daughter is 4 blocks away." "I know," he said. His voice had something in it now that wasn't operational. Something human and unguarded that she suspected he did not allow very often. "I know exactly what that means. I am not minimizing it." "Who was he?" she asked. "A message," Roman said. "From someone who wants me to know they have access to things I thought were protected." "And is that person dangerous to us specifically or to you specifically?" "Right now," he said, "I don't know." The bell above the cafe door rang. Laurel's head snapped up. The door was locked. She'd locked it herself. But the bell rang because the door was opening, and the door was opening because someone had a key, and the only people with keys to Morning Harbor were Laurel, Jess, and the building manager who used it for emergencies. A man walked in, not the broad-shouldered man from before. Someone different, older, late 40s, with silver at his temples and a suit that cost significantly more than anything worn by the first visitor. He moved the way someone moved when they owned the space they walked into, which was a quality she'd only seen in two people, Roman and now this man. He looked at her with something that was almost apologetic. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, "I apologize for the hour. I need you to give Roman a message." She had the phone still in her hand. She could hear Roman on the other end, could hear the quality of his breathing change. "Who are you?" she said. "My name is Vincent Lau," he said. "I work with Roman. I've worked with him for 17 years. From the phone, Roman's voice came through, flat and stripped of everything. "Don't say anything to him, Laurel." Vincent Lau heard it. He looked at the phone in her hand. He looked back at her. "He didn't tell you about me," Vincent said. "He didn't tell you that I've been managing the operations he's been pulling back from. The ones he's been dismantling." He paused. "He also didn't tell you that I've been the one deciding what gets dismantled and what doesn't." "Laurel, go to the back room," Roman said now. She didn't move. "He's been making decisions about his organization," Vincent said, "based on what he thinks you need from him. And that has created significant problems for a number of people who did not agree to have their livelihoods restructured because Roman Kessler fell in love with a woman who makes coffee. He said it without heat. Just factually. Which was almost worse. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to tell you the truth that he hasn't." "What truth?" she said. "That leaving this life isn't something one person decides," Vincent said. "And that Roman has been dismantling things that belong to other people, not just to him. And those people are not going to accept that quietly." She heard Roman's voice on the phone, and it had stopped being operational and had become something else, something she'd never heard from him before. Something raw under all the precision. "Vincent," Roman said through the phone, "this is between us." "It stopped being between us," Vincent said, to the phone in her hand, "when you put her in it." The cafe was silent, except for the refrigeration unit and the rain against the windows, and the particular quality of silence that descended when everyone in a room understood that something had just changed, and none of them knew yet what came next. Laurel looked at the phone in her hand. She looked at Vince in his expensive suit standing in her cafe with his apologetic expression and his 17 years, and the particular authority of someone who had not come to threaten, but had come to make absolutely clear that the threat already existed. She looked at the corner table. She set the phone face up on the table so Roman could hear. "Tell me," she said to Vincent Lau, "everything he should have told me." And Vincent Lau sat down across from her in Roman Kessler's chair, folded his hands on the table, and began to speak. Vincent Lau had the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong movement got people killed. He sat in sheen Roman chair, with his hands folded on the table, and he spoke in the measured, unhurried tone of a man delivering a quarterly report, organized, thorough, without visible emotion. Which was its own kind of threat, Laurel understood. The absence of heat was not the absence of danger. It was control. Roman was still on the phone. She could hear him breathing. She left the phone face up on the table. Vincent began with the structure. Kessler's syndicate, as Roman had described it, was not one organization but a layered set of interdependent arrangements, legitimate holdings on top, operational infrastructure in the middle, and at the base, agreements with 7 other entities across the Pacific Northwest that had been running for between 9 and 22 years. Some of those entities were criminal organizations in the traditional sense. Some were what Vincent called adjacent interests, businesses that needed particular services that couldn't be contracted through legitimate channels. The agreements were financial, territorial, and structural. They had been negotiated over years. They were not, Vincent said, Roman's alone to dissolve. When Roman started pulling back, Vincent said he did it unilaterally. Without consultation, he began redirecting legitimate revenue streams. Cut off operational support for 2 of the 7 partners without negotiation or compensation. He initiated contact with federal prosecutors. The last sentence hit differently than the rest. Laurel kept her face still. From the phone, Vincent stopped. Vincent looked at the phone. He's been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's office for 4 months, he said to Laurel. Preliminary conversations, nothing signed. But conversations that, if they went forward, would expose every partner in the arrangement to federal prosecution. Not just Roman, all of them. And they know? Laurel said. They know something is moving, Vincent said. They don't know the specifics yet. But the man who visited you tonight works for one of the partners who is starting to ask questions. Roman hasn't answered. Laurel was very quiet. She looked at the table between them. She thought about Maisie 4 blocks away with Donna, who was her neighbor and not a security professional, asleep on the couch watching television and unaware that the world outside had just reorganized itself into something with new and specific dangers. Why are you here? She said. Why are you telling me this? Vincent was quiet for a moment, the first pause she'd heard from him. Because I've worked with Roman for 17 years, he said. And I watched him do something I've never seen him do. I watched him look at a woman across a cafe counter and start making decisions based on what she needed instead of what the structure required. He paused again. That is either the most human thing I've ever seen him do or the most dangerous mistake of his life. Possibly both. And your position? My position is that the partners won't stay patient much longer, he said. Roman needs to either recommit to the structure or complete the exit in a way that compensates everyone adequately. Partial exits don't work. They just create enemies with detailed knowledge of your vulnerabilities. And I'm a vulnerability, Laurel said. You are the reason he started moving, Vincent said. Yes. In the partner's analysis, you are the variable that disrupted a stable system. From the phone, Roman's voice came through again. Not operational now. Not pressurized. Something that sounded like the thing underneath all of it. Laurel, I need you to listen to me and not to him. She picked up the phone. She put it to her ear. I'm listening to both of you, she said. Because both of you are telling me things I needed to know. A silence. Is any of it wrong? She said. A beat. No, Roman said. None of it is wrong. She set the phone face up again. She looked at Vincent. You didn't come here to warn me, she said. You came here to give Roman a message. What's the message? Vincent looked at her with something she hadn't seen from him yet, something that was close to respect, which was not the same as warmth, but was the form of acknowledgement she was most prepared to receive right now. The message, he said, is that he has 10 days to make a decision. Full recommitment or a complete exit with adequate structural compensation. If he chooses the exit, the partners need the federal contact terminated and a financial settlement negotiated. If that doesn't happen, the partners will begin protecting their own interests independently. Which means what, specifically? Which means they stop waiting for Roman to manage the situation. The sentence was quiet and complete and did not need any elaboration. She understood. She stood up. Vincent stood up across from her because he had the old-school instinct to stand when a woman at a table stood, which was an absurd detail to notice, but she noticed it anyway. I need you to leave my cafe, she said. He picked up his jacket. He buttoned it. He looked at her one more time with that expression that wasn't warmth and wasn't threat and was somewhere in the precise middle of both. You're not what I expected, he said. People keep saying that, she said. He left. The bell rang. The door closed. Laurel stood in the empty cafe and picked up her phone. Tell me what you need to do, she said. I need to see you, Roman said. Tomorrow morning. 7:45, a pause. Laurel, I know what 10 days means, she said. I need tonight to figure out what I think. You can have tomorrow morning. She hung up. She stood in the dark for 30 seconds. Then she turned off the remaining lights, locked the door with both locks, and walked 4 blocks home in the rain. She knocked on Donna's door at 11 p.m. and stood in the hallway in her damp jacket and said, I need to bring Maisie home. Donna took one look at her face and said nothing except hold on and went to get her. Maisie was half asleep when Donna brought her out, draped over her shoulder in her pajamas with the dragon print, clutching the stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. She made a small sound when Laurel took her and pressed her face into Laurel's shoulder with the absolute unconscious trust of a child who has never had a reason to doubt the person carrying her. Laurel held her in the hallway for a moment, longer than was necessary. Then she took her home. Roman was there at 7:30, 15 minutes early, which she noted because he had never once arrived early in 6 months. She let him in before she unlocked the front. They stood behind the closed cafe in the gray morning light, the espresso machine warming up, the refrigeration unit clicking, the particular pre-opening quiet of the place that she'd built and that now contained, along with everything else, this. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the beginning." "Not the version with the gaps," he told her. It took 40 minutes. She made coffee for both of them, and she stood behind the counter while he sat at the counter's edge and he talked in the flat, precise way he had, leaving nothing out. The origin of the syndicate, inherited from his father at 23, when his father died of a heart attack in the middle of a meeting and left Roman holding something he hadn't fully understood the weight of yet. The years of what he called modernization, moving it away from direct violence toward financial and operational crime, because he had believed that was a meaningful distinction and had lived long enough to doubt it. The 7 partners, the nature of the agreements. The federal contact that had started not because of Laurel, he said, but because of what he'd started wanting when he began sitting in this cafe, a version of his life that could exist in the same world as something worth protecting. "I didn't tell you about the federal contact," he said, "because it wasn't final, and because telling you made it real in a way that required decisions I wasn't ready to ask you to make." "That was a decision you made for me," she said. He said. "It was wrong." She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them looked away. 10 days, she said. "Yes. What do you need to complete the exit?" He was quiet for a moment. "A financial structure that compensates the partners for the operational disruption. The federal conversations need to produce an immunity arrangement that covers me and doesn't expose partners to direct prosecution, which is a difficult line because the prosecutors want more than I want to give them. And I need Vincent to manage the transition internally so that it doesn't collapse into something violent." "Vincent," she said, "who just walked into my cafe at 11 p.m. "Who I did not send," Roman said. His jaw tightened. "That was his own initiative. And it's the first time in 17 years he's moved without my direction, which tells me he's more frightened than he's showing. Is he a threat to us?" "Vincent is not a violent man. He's an architect. He builds structures and he protects them, and he doesn't like it when someone starts removing load-bearing walls without a plan." "Are you removing load-bearing walls without a plan?" He picked up his coffee. He was quiet for a moment. "I had a plan," he said. "It required more time than I have now." She processed this. "What changed the timeline?" she said. "The man who came in last night," Roman said. "He's not from Vincent's group. He works for a partner called Mercer. Elliot Mercer runs distribution operations in 3 counties and has been the most profitable of the 7 partners for the last 8 years. He's also the most volatile. If Mercer is asking questions, 10 days Vincent quoted me is optimistic." "How optimistic?" "Could be 72 hours, Roman said. "Could be less." The number landed. She set her coffee cup down. She looked at her hands on the counter. She thought about the Burr set she'd ordered 3 days ago and the second mortgage and the $11,000 she'd paid back and the 6 years of building something from nothing and the corner table and the newspaper and a child who had named her stuffed rabbit Captain Whiskers and performed surgery on it with a needle and thread. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. Roman looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, not the contained operational quality, not the particular attention he gave her across the counter. Something older, something that had been under the rest of it the whole time. "I don't need anything from you," he said. "I need you and Maisie somewhere safe while I handle this. That's the only thing I need from you." "That's not a complete answer." "Laurel, if I'm already in it," she said, "and my name is already known, and my cafe's address is already known, then removing me from the equation doesn't unring that bell. It just means I'm somewhere else being afraid while you manage something that involved me without my knowledge." His jaw worked. "Yes," he said, "that's accurate. So tell me the complete answer." He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was coming through the windows now, that particular Seattle gray that was its own quality of light, rather than a diluted version of something else. I need you to trust me for 72 hours, he said. While I move faster than I plan to move, and do things that are not clean, and make arrangements that I will have to live with. And I need to know that at the end of it, whatever the end looks like, you're still standing. I've been standing this whole time, she said. I know, he said. That's why I need it. She looked at him across the counter. Go do what you have to do, she said. He left. The morning rush came. She served it. She served it with the same precision she always brought, because the alternative was letting what was happening outside the cafe walls bleed into the only thing she'd built that was entirely hers, and she was not going to do that. At 10 a.m., Tristan walked in. She almost told him to leave on sight. Not out of anger. She was past anger with him, had left it somewhere in the previous year of rebuilding, but because she had a limited amount of bandwidth and he was not where she needed to spend it. But he came in with a quality she hadn't seen before. Not the wounded pride of the first visit or the raw grief of the revelation. A something seen-y. He looked like someone who had been sitting with something difficult long enough to get to the other side of it and arrive at something cleaner. He ordered coffee. He paid. He waited while she made it. I spoke to a family lawyer, he said. I want to do this right. I want to understand what the right looks like before I ask you for anything. She set the cup on the counter. She looked at him. That's the correct first step, she said. I know I don't have standing, he said. I know I have to earn it. I'm not here to renegotiate what you said. He picked up the cup. I'm here because I wanted to say that I understand what you built. He looked around the cafe genuinely, the way he hadn't managed that first day. I don't have a word for what it costs to do this. I didn't when it was happening, and I don't now. But I understand that it was enormous. And I'm sorry that I didn't see it. Laurel was quiet for a moment. She thought about all the things she could say, the full accounting, the catalog of what it had cost, the sleepless nights and the cracked hands and the moments when Maisie was sick and she couldn't take a day off because a day off was a day the cafe didn't run, and a day the cafe didn't run was money she didn't have. All of it true. All of it fully available to her. She said thank you. He nodded. He drank his coffee at the counter, and he didn't stay longer than it took to drink it. And when he left, he held the door for the customer coming in behind him, which was a small thing, and was also the first small thing she'd seen him do, without an audience to notice it. She went back to work. At 2 p.m. her phone rang. Roman's number. She stepped into the back. I've spoken to the prosecutors, he said. His voice was the operational one, stripped down, efficient. They want names above the immediate partners. They want the financial architecture. I can give them 3 years of records and 4 names above the partner level, which is more than they expected and less than they wanted. And in exchange, immunity for me. Reduced exposure for the partners if they cooperate with the secondary investigation. Sound splitting, a structured exit from the legitimate side of the operation that protects the employees, about 300 people in the maritime and real estate divisions who have no connection to the criminal side. And Vincent. A pause. Vincent is one of the 4 names. She absorbed that. He'll know you gave him up, she said. Yes. Is that a danger? Vincent will make a deal with the prosecutors before the week is out, Roman said. He's a practical man. He'll understand that cooperating is better than the alternative. A beat. He'll also understand that I gave him a way out rather than a way down. The distinction will matter to him eventually. And Mercer? Mercer is more difficult. His voice went tighter. Mercer is not a man who responds to legal process as a deterrent. He responds to structural power and financial consequence. I need to neutralize his leverage before the prosecutors move. How? I need to demonstrate that whatever information he thinks he has about the federal contact doesn't give him the outcome he wants, which means moving faster than his timeline allows. Roman, she said, how dangerous is faster? A pause. Not the operational pause. The other one. I'll be fine, he said. That didn't answer my question. Laurel, if you're going to ask me to trust you, she said, then when I ask you how dangerous something is, you tell me how dangerous it is. That's what trust means. A longer pause. There will be a meeting tonight, he said. With Mercer directly. at a location he controls. That is not an ideal situation. But you're going, yes. With people. 3 people I trust completely. Which is a number I've arrived at carefully. She stood in the back of her cafe with the noise of the front coming through the wall, the espresso machine, the low register of customer conversation, Jess calling out an order, and she thought about what it meant to trust carefully. The number you arrived at, the process of arriving at it. Come back, she said, a beat. Yes, he said. He hung up. She stood there for a moment. Then she went back to the front and served the afternoon rush and closed at 5 and counted the till and wiped down the machines and turned off the lights. She drove to Donna's and picked up Maisie, who had apparently spent the afternoon making an extremely ambitious paper model of a castle and required assistance transporting it home without structural collapse. Laurel carried the castle with both hands while Maisie walked ahead, holding the drawbridge, which had detached, giving directions about castle-carrying posture. At home, she made dinner. She gave Maisie a bath. She read 2 chapters of the rocket ship book. She turned out the light. She sat in the kitchen in the dark. Her phone was on the table. She looked at it. She did not pick it up. At 9:47 it rang. She answered before the second ring. It's done, Roman said. His voice was rough in a way she hadn't heard before. Not emotional, physical, like something that had been used hard. Are you hurt, she said, a pause, minor. What does minor mean? Nothing that requires a hospital. Roman Mercer will not be a problem, he said. His partners have been presented with a proposal that makes cooperation with the federal process more financially sensible than resistance. They've accepted. And Vincent? Vincent called the prosecutors 2 hours ago. He's cooperating. She pressed her hand flat on the kitchen table. Where are you? She said, he told her. She went. She drove across the city in the rain to an address in Sodu that turned out to be a private medical office on the second floor of a building that had no visible sign. She walked up the stairs and through a door that a man she didn't recognize held open for her, and into a room where Roman was sitting in a chair with his jacket off, and a field dressing on his left forearm and a glass of water in his right hand that he was holding with a steadiness she recognized as a performance for her benefit. She stood in the doorway and looked at him. He looked back. The room was quiet. The man who'd held the door had stepped out. There was a woman in the room she took to be a doctor, who looked at Laurel and made a brief assessment, and apparently decided Laurel was authorized because she finished taping the dressing without asking any questions and then picked up her bag and left. Laurel crossed the room. She pulled a chair up and sat across from him, close enough that their knees were nearly touching, and she looked at him with the complete attention she usually rationed and reserved, and was, right now, not rationing. How bad, she said. A knife, he said. Shallow. It looks worse than it is. Who Mercer? Directly. He looked at the dressing. He's old school. It was a message as much as anything. What happened to him? He'll recover, Roman said. He'll cooperate. He doesn't have any other viable option. He looked at her. It's over. The structural part. What comes next is legal and procedural and will take months and will cost me most of what the Kessler name built over 30 years. But the part where someone walks into your cafe and says your name, that part is over. She looked at him. She thought about all the things she could say. The accounting of what the last 72 hours had cost her, not in the material sense, a sound like green wood splitting, but in the specific currency of a woman who had built everything she had on the principle that she would never again be subject to something she hadn't chosen. She had not chosen this. She had not chosen any of it. And here she was anyway, in a room in Sodu at 10 p.m., sitting across from a man with a knife wound and a water glass, and 17 years of a life he was dismantling piece by piece. You need to tell Maisie something simple if she asks why you're not coming to the cafe for a while, she said. She notices everything, she'll ask. Roman blinked. Of all the things he'd prepared himself to hear, she could tell this was not it. I'll tell her I had to travel for work, he said. If that's acceptable, that's fine, she said. She'll accept it if it comes with a postcard from somewhere. I'll send a postcard, he said. He said it with the absolute seriousness he'd given. Every question Maisie had ever asked him, and something in Laurel's chest did the complicated thing again. Can you drive? She said. Yes. Then I'm going home, she said. And you're going to wherever you're staying and you're going to sleep. And tomorrow, we're going to figure out what the next part looks like. She stood. She looked at him. But I'm telling you right now, whatever the next part looks like, you don't decide it for me. We figure it out together. Or we don't figure it out at all. Roman looked up at her from the chair. Together, he said. It was not a negotiation. It was not a concession. It was the first time she'd heard that particular word from a man and believed it didn't have anything inside it that would later need to be renegotiated. She walked to the door. Roman, she said, without turning around. Yes. Send a purple dragon on the postcard, she said. She'll think that's better than a city. She went home. Behind her, in the quiet of the medical office, Roman Kessler sat with his water glass and his field dressing and the particular stillness of a man who had just given up an empire and had not yet fully processed what was left. What was left, he was beginning to understand, was everything that mattered, and nothing that he'd been told was supposed to. He picked up his phone. He searched for the first time in his life for a postcard service that could deliver a purple dragon. Postcard arrived on a Thursday. Maisie found it in the mail slot before Laurel was fully awake, which meant she'd been standing on the step stool in the entryway, going through the mail, herself, which was something Laurel had told her approximately 40 times not to do. Came into the kitchen, holding it above her head like a flag. It's a dragon, Maisie announced. A purple one, and it's flying over a mountain. Laurel took the card, turned it over. Roman's handwriting was precise and slightly cramped, the handwriting of someone who had learned penmanship from someone exacting and had never fully relaxed it. Working on something that takes longer than expected. The dragon's name is up to you. Our Maisie took the card back immediately and carried it to her room. Laurel heard a drawer open and closed the specific drawer where Maisie kept things she'd decided were important. Alongside a marble she'd found on the sidewalk, a movie ticket stub from a film she'd seen with Donna, and a photograph of her grandmother from a box Laurel had left accessible on purpose. Laurel made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the rain. That had been 3 weeks ago. In those 3 weeks, Roman had called every other day, not long calls, not elaborate check-ins, but brief and direct in the way he did everything, confirming what was moving and what wasn't, giving her information she hadn't asked for, but earned he was providing, because the alternative was her, not knowing, which had also cost them both something they couldn't entirely name. The legal process was moving. The federal arrangement had been formalized. Roman's attorneys were managing the asset transfer, the legitimate holdings being restructured into independent corporate entities that would continue to operate and employ the 300 people who had nothing to do with anything criminal. The maritime division was being sold to a group of institutional investors who had been waiting, apparently for years. The real estate portfolio was being liquidated in tranches over 18 months. What Roman would be left with personally, he'd told her in the flat, factual way he told her things, was significant, but not what it had been. He seemed untroubled by this in a way she found she believed. Vincent Lau was cooperating with the federal investigation. He'd entered a negotiated arrangement that would result in 3 years in a federal facility, reduced from a potential 14 because of the depth of his cooperation. Roman had told her this without apparent satisfaction or guilt, and she'd asked him how he felt about it, and he'd been quiet for a moment before saying, complicated. He built something real for a long time. The fact that the thing was wrong doesn't erase the fact that he built it. She'd thought about that for days. Elliot Mercer had accepted the structural proposal delivered the night of the meeting, which she had a partial account of and had not pressed for a fuller one. Because some things she understood she needed to know, and some things she understood were Roman's to carry. Mercer was cooperating with the investigation. His wound, she gathered, mirrored Roman's, which she suspected was a detail that had its own particular meaning between them. The man who had walked into her café and said her name, the broad-shouldered one, the earlier visitor, had been identified, Roman told her, as a contractor Mercer used for communication. He was not a threat. He was a messenger who had delivered his message and whose usefulness had ended. None of this was clean. She understood that. The world did not reorganize into clean lines just because the people inside it made decisions to move in a different direction. Roman had been part of something for 17 years that had damaged things she would never fully know about, and the fact that he was dismantling it now, at significant personal cost, was a real thing but did not erase the 17 years. She held both of those facts at the same time without resolving them, because she was not a person who required resolution in order to move. She went to the cafe. She worked. She served the construction crew and the dental office women and the crossword man and the rotating cast of Capitol Hill regulars who had become, over 2.5 years, the texture of her days. She did not tell anyone what had happened. Not Jess, not Donna, not her mother, who called every Sunday and asked how the cafe was going with the specific verbal posture of someone who was really asking, "Are you okay, and is Maisie okay, and are you managing everything?" She said the cafe was good. She said the burr set had arrived, and the grinder sounded right again. She said Maisie was reading chapter books now, which was true, and had strong opinions about which chapter books were worth her time, which was also true and had resulted in 2 returns to the library under protest. Her mother said, "You sound tired." "I'm always tired," Laurel said. "Different tired," her mother said. Her mother was 71 and had raised Laurel's own for the last 11 years of her childhood after Laurel's father had a second-act crisis and relocated to another state, and there was very little her mother missed in the specific category of a woman managing more than she's saying. "I'm fine, Mom," she said, a pause. "Is it a person?" "I'm fine," Laurel said again. Her mother let it go. But the silence before she let it go had a shape that said, "I know it's a person. I'm giving you room." Tristan came in twice that month. Both times he ordered coffee and paid, and didn't stay longer than it took to drink it. The second time, he asked quietly, without the wounded edge he'd carried in earlier visits, whether she'd thought any more about what a supervised meeting might look like. She had thought about it. She'd thought about it the way she thought about difficult problems, structurally, not emotionally. What Maisie knew, that her father wasn't around. What she'd asked, less than Laurel expected, and in the particular way children ask things when they were processing at their own pace. What she would need to be introduced to the idea before the person, to have time adjusted in manageable amounts, to never feel that a new presence was a displacement of something she already had. "I think we do it at a neutral place," Laurel said. "Not here and not your space. A park, maybe. 1 hour. I'm present the entire time, and if she's uncomfortable, we stop immediately with no pressure to try again until she's ready." Tristan nodded slowly. He was looking at the counter. "Does she know anything about me?" "She knows your name," Laurel said. "She knows you exist. She's 6, she's processing." "What did she say when you told her?" Laurel thought about the night she'd sat on the edge of Maisie's bed and found the simplest true version of it. She'd said, "Your dad's name is Tristan. He lives in Seattle, and I'm going to let him know about you. It might take some time before you meet him, because meeting people takes time to do right." And Maisie had listened, with her knees pulled to her chest and her rabbit in her lap, and then said, "Does he like dragons?" Laurel had said she didn't know. Maisie had said, "You should find out. That's important information." "She asked if you like dragons," Laurel said. Tristan made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that needed to stay in his chest. "Do I pass?" "I don't know," she said. "What's your position on dragons?" He looked at her. Something moved across his face, not the complicated grief she'd seen before, but something more specific and more useful. "I'm open to them," he said. "I'm very open to them." "I'll let her know," Laurel said. He finished his coffee. He left. She stood at the counter for a moment after the door closed and thought about the 6-year-old in the drawer-keeping phase of her life, cataloging things that mattered next to a marble and a movie stub and a photograph. She thought about what it cost a person to become someone's father, after the fact, not the dramatic cost, not the obvious one, but the daily incremental cost of showing up, when showing up was the only currency that counted. She thought, maybe he can pay it. She didn't know. But maybe. Roman came back on a Tuesday. She knew he was coming. He'd called the night before, brief and direct as always. "I'll be in Seattle tomorrow. I'd like to come in at 7:45 if that's all right." She'd said yes. She'd hung up and stood in her kitchen and felt her pulse do something she refused to examine too closely. She was behind the counter at 7:40 when he came through the door. He looked different. Not dramatically. He was wearing the same quality of dark clothing, carrying the same phone-folded newspaper, moving with the same economy she'd cataloged over 6 months. But something in the surface of him had changed. The particular pressure she'd always felt behind his containment. The thing she'd identified early on as the invisible weight of a structure being perpetually managed that was less present. He looked, she thought, like someone who had set something down that had been very heavy and was still getting used to the new sensation of his own hands. He reached the counter. She had the Americano ready. Triple shot, no sugar. He took it. He looked at her. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. The cafe was doing its morning thing around them. The construction crew in the corner, the espresso machine running, the refrigeration unit cycling, and they stood in it, the way two people stood in a place that had become, without formal announcement, theirs. "How's the grinder?" he said. "Fixed," she said. "New set." "Sounds right." "Good," he said. "How's your arm?" He flexed his left hand slightly. "Fine, it was shallow. You said that, it was true." She looked at him for a moment. "Maisie's been calling the postcard Dragon Gerald," she said. "I want you to know that." Something moved through his face. "Gerald," he said. "She says it's a good name for a dragon who flies over mountains. She's been drawing Gerald in her coloring book. Gerald has a backstory now." "What's the backstory?" "Gerald used to be afraid of heights," Laurel said, "but he decided that was a waste of a perfectly good pair of wings." Roman was quiet. He looked at the coffee cup in his hand. When he looked back up, his eyes had that quality she'd learned to read, not closed, not performing, just present in the full sense of the word. "I'd like to see Maisie," he said. "When you think it's right." "Saturday," she said. "She's coming in for an hour in the morning. I do that sometimes when I have a shorter shift." She colors. "You can come." "All right," he said. He went to his corner table. He sat down. He opened his newspaper. The morning settled into its rhythm. Jess arrived at 7:50 and started prepping the pastry case and glanced at the corner table and glanced back at Laurel with an expression that asked approximately 14 questions simultaneously. Laurel gave her a look that answered none of them, and Jess, who was 24 and perceptive and had the good sense to know which questions were hers to ask, went back to the pastry case without saying anything. At 8:30, during the thin moment between early rush and the mid-morning wave, Roman came to the counter for a refill. She poured it. He didn't immediately step back. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right," she said. "The maritime sale completed yesterday. The real estate disposition is on schedule. The federal arrangement is formalized." He paused. "What I have left is a private investment portfolio and a consulting arrangement with two of the former legitimate holdings. He stopped. "I'm not Kessler Maritime anymore. I'm not the syndicate. I'm not the thing that the room shifted around." She looked at him. "I'm Roman," he said. "I don't know exactly what that means yet in terms of the day-to-day. But I wanted you to know what it doesn't mean anymore." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what you want?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Tell me," she said. "This," he said. He didn't gesture broadly. He didn't perform it. He said it looking directly at her, at the counter between them. At the cafe and its morning noise, and the crossword man settling into his chair, and Jess arranging the pastry case, and all of it. This specific thing, whatever it becomes. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not a reward," she said, "for dismantling something. I need you to know that I understand what you did, and I understand what it cost, and I'm not confused about whether it was the right thing. It was, but it wasn't a transaction, I know," he said. "You didn't do it to get me. You did it because it was what you needed to do." "Yes," he said. "Those two things happen to point in the same direction." "But yes." She nodded. She picked up the coffee carafe and topped off the cup she'd already filled, which was an automatic gesture that communicated more than she intended. His mouth moved slightly. "Saturday," she said. 7:45. "Gerald's creator will be on the high stool." He went back to his table. She went back to work. Saturday arrived with the specific quality of Seattle mornings in late spring, when the rain took a temporary position of restraint and the light came through at an angle that made ordinary things look like they were being considered seriously. Laurel opened at 6. By 7:30, she had the cafe to herself, and Maisie, who was on the high stool with the coloring book open to a fresh page, working with the focused intensity of someone on deadline. "What are we drawing today?" Laurel asked. "Gerald is meeting someone new," Maisie said without looking up. "I'm doing the background." "What's the background?" "A harbor," Maisie said, "because harbors are where things come back to." Laurel stood behind the counter and looked at her daughter's bent head and felt something move through her that was entirely too large for the morning, and which she held quietly, the way she held most things that were too large. At 7:45 the bell rang. Roman came in. He was wearing a dark jacket she hadn't seen before, and carrying the newspaper under his arm in the exact same configuration he'd carried it for 6 months, which she suspected was not an accident. He saw Maisie on the stool. He stopped at the counter. "Triple Americano?" Laurel said. "Please," he said. Maisie looked up. She looked at Roman with the evaluating squint she deployed when assessing new information. "You came back," she said. "I did," he said. "You were gone a long time." "I was working on something," he said. "Did you finish it?" He looked at Laurel briefly. "Yes," he said. Maisie looked back at her coloring book. "Gerald is meeting someone today," she said. "I'm drawing his friend. I haven't decided what color the friend is yet." Roman picked up his coffee. He did not move toward his corner table. He moved toward the stool beside Maisie's and stood next to it in the particular way. That was a question about whether he was welcome to sit. Maisie slid the coloring book slightly toward him. "Not all the way. Just enough." "You can look," she said. "But I decide the colors." "That's fair," he said. He sat down. Laurel watched from behind the counter as Maisie began a highly detailed explanation of Gerald's history, the fear of heights, the mountain, the decision that wings were not meant to be wasted, and Roman listened with the specific quality of attention he'd brought to everything she'd ever said to him, which was complete and unhurried, and absent of any impulse to redirect or summarize. After several minutes, Maisie pointed at the blank, dragon-shaped outline on the facing page. "That's Gerald's friend," she said. "What color do you think?" Roman looked at the outline. He considered it with visible seriousness. "Green," he said. "Dark green, like the water." Maisie thought about this. She pulled the green crayon from the box. She looked at it. She put it on the paper and started filling in. "Good choice," she said. "His name is going to be something important. What do you have so far?" "I'm thinking about it," Maisie said. "Names take time to get right." "They do," Roman agreed. Laurel turned away and made herself busy with the things that needed doing, which were the ordinary things of a Saturday morning restocking, calibrating, preparing for the mid-morning wave. She kept her back to the counter for a little while. She needed to. The month that followed was not cinematic. It was not a sequence of significant moments strung together by meaningful music. It was ordinary and difficult, and sometimes frustrating in the way that lives were when they were actually being lived rather than arranged. Roman's legal process moved through its stages. There were weeks when the calls were short and stressed, when the attorneys needed things, and the federal timeline shifted, and the asset disposition ran into complications that required his full attention. He was not always available. He was not always present in the way she wanted him to be. She told him so. Directly, twice, and both times he said, "You're right," and then did what he could to correct it, which was not always perfect, and was always genuine, which she had decided was the standard she was actually applying. Tristan met Maisie on a Saturday in April at a park near the waterfront. Laurel sat on a bench 10 feet away and watched. She had told Maisie the night before, "Tristan is your dad. He's going to be there tomorrow. You don't have to do anything except be yourself." And Maisie had sat with this for a long moment and then said, "Does he know Gerald is real?" Laurel had said, "I told him you were open to dragons." Maisie had said, "Okay." The meeting lasted 45 minutes. Tristan arrived looking like someone who had rehearsed and then deliberately tried to forget the rehearsal, which was the right instinct. He sat on the bench across from Maisie, and she looked at him with her evaluating squint and asked, after 30 seconds of assessment, whether he had any pets. He said no. She asked why not. He said he traveled too much. She said that's a good reason. Dogs need consistency. He said, I'm working on being more consistent. She appeared to find this acceptable. By the end of 45 minutes, they were doing a side-by-side thing on the bench where Maisie was explaining something at length, and Tristan was listening with the specific expression of someone who is receiving more information than they expected, and finding it more than they could have prepared for. When Laurel came over and said it was time to go, Maisie stood up and looked at Tristan and said, You can come back if you want to. Tristan said, I want to. Maisie said, okay. Next time, bring a drawing of something. I want to see how you think. She walked back to Laurel's side with the matter-of-fact purposefulness of someone who had completed a task to her satisfaction. Laurel did not look back at Tristan. She heard him behind her, heard the quality of his breathing, and she knew without looking that he was doing what she'd done behind the coffee counter. That Saturday morning, holding something too large for the moment and doing it quietly. She brought Maisie home and made lunch, and did not think about whether she'd made the right decision because she had made it, and it was made. And the question now was only what happened next. Expansions happened in June. The storefront next to Morning Harbor had been vacant for 7 months, and the building owner had mentioned it twice, in passing, in a way that meant she was intended to consider it. Laurel had been considering it since the first mention and pretending she hadn't because the consideration was terrifying in the specific way that good things were terrifying when you'd built yourself a careful life and couldn't quite afford to want too much. She did the numbers 7 times. She showed them to her accountant, who said the same thing accountants said when numbers were aggressive but defensible. It's possible, but you have no margin for error. She showed them to her mother, who said, You've had no margin for error since the beginning, and you're still here. She signed the lease on a Thursday. Roman called that evening, the routine every other day call. She told him about the expansion. He was quiet for a moment. Do you need— No, she said, another moment. All right, he said. I'm going to do it the same way I did the first one, she said. It's going to be hard, and it's going to go over budget, and it's going to be mine. I know, he said. I wasn't going to offer. I was going to ask if you needed a contact for the build-out contractors. I have one who's honest and doesn't inflate. She paused. That, she said, I'll take. The contractor was named Doug, and he was a compact, weathered man in his 50s who gave her a bid that was fair and a timeline that was realistic and a disposition that suggested he'd spent decades working for people who knew what they wanted and didn't need to be convinced they knew it. He finished 4 days ahead of schedule, which had never happened to her before. She paid him and tipped him, and he nodded like someone who expected competence and appreciated finding it. The expanded Morning Harbor opened on a Wednesday in August. She did not make it an event. She did not do a soft opening or an announcement or a social media moment. She unlocked both doors at 6 a.m. and turned on the lights and started the machines, and Jess came in at 7, looking at the new space with the expression of someone who had been watching something be built and was now experiencing the fact of it being real. Bigger, Jess said. That was the goal, Laurel said. It looks the same, Jess said, but bigger. That's hard to do. I know, Laurel said. I worked on it. Maisie came in at 8, escorted by Donna, because Laurel had wanted her there for the first morning. She walked through the space with her hands behind her back and her head moving at the critical angle she deployed when assessing things of importance. The new tables are different, she said. Slightly, Laurel said. I like them, Maisie said, but the corner table should stay the same. Laurel looked at the corner table, Roman's table, the one she'd never reupholstered or repositioned or moved, despite 2 years of changes to the rest of the space, because she'd told herself it was just a table in a good spot, and not because she was leaving it where it was. Corner table stays the same, she said. Maisie approved. She climbed the high stool and opened the coloring book to the current page, which was a detailed scene featuring Gerald and his dark green friend engaged in some kind of mountain negotiation that Laurel hadn't been fully briefed on. Roman arrived at 7:45. He came through the door and stopped. He looked at the expanded space, the new tables, the additional counter seating, the window along the new section that she'd fought the building owner for and won. He looked at it, the way he looked at things he wanted to fully understand before he said anything about them. He came to the counter. "You did it," he said. "I did it," she said. "The window along the new side is 3 weeks of negotiation," she said. "Worth it," he said. She made his Americano. He took it. He started to move toward the corner table, and then he stopped, because Maisie had looked up from the coloring book and was looking at him with the particular expression that indicated she had something to say. "Gerald's friend needs a name today," she said. "I've been waiting." Roman came to the counter. He set his coffee down and looked at the dark green dragon on the page, who was mid-negotiation with Gerald over a mountain that appeared to have been contested for some time. "What kind of name?" he said. "Something that means he stayed," Maisie said. "When things were hard, he's the kind of dragon who stayed." Roman was quiet for a moment. Laurel stood behind the counter with her hands on the espresso machine and her pulse doing the thing she'd stopped pretending not to notice. "Marcus," Roman said. "It means hammer, but it used to mean something older. It meant someone who held the line." Maisie said the name under her breath. Testing it. She looked at the dragon. She looked at Roman. "Marcus," she said. "Yes, that's right." She wrote it in careful block letters at the bottom of the page, sounding each letter out as she went. Roman picked up his coffee. He looked at Laurel. Something moved between them, across the counter, not spoken, not performed. A sound like green wood splitting, the particular communication of two people who had been through something that didn't have an easy name and were standing on the other side of it and finding, somewhat to their mutual surprise, that they were both still standing. She reached across the counter. Not for his hand, that was not the gesture. She set a small folded piece of paper beside his coffee cup. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Open it later," she said. He put it in his jacket pocket. He went to his corner table. He opened his newspaper. The morning moved forward. The crossword man came in at 8:15 and settled into his chair, and Laurel brought him his black coffee without being asked. And he said thank you the way he always said it, not as a transaction, but as a genuine accounting, which was something she'd noticed early and had never stopped appreciating. The construction crew came and went. The dental office women debated the new seating options and decided they approved. A sound like greenwood splitting. Two people she'd never seen before came in because they'd seen the new sign and stayed for an hour, which meant they might become regulars, which meant the expansion was already doing what it was supposed to do. At 10:30, during the quiet between rushes, Laurel stood at the window along the new section, the one she'd fought for, and looked out at the street. The rain had started again, the light variety that didn't quite justify an umbrella. A woman walked by with a stroller. A man on a bicycle slowed for the crosswalk. The ordinary persistence of the city doing its ordinary thing. She thought about her grandmother, who had died before Maisie was born and who had therefore never known her, which was one of the real losses in Laurel's life, the kind she didn't talk about because there was no corrective available. She thought about everyone needs one safe place before facing the world. She thought about what it had cost to build one from a position of absolute zero, and what it had cost to protect it, and what it was costing now, not in money or danger, but in the daily specific courage of letting things in that could damage it. She thought, it is still mine. Everything she'd let in, and everything she'd fought for, and everything she was still building, none of it had taken the cafe from her. It was still exactly what she'd made it. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, the whole thing. She went back to work. At noon, she texted Tristan next Saturday. Same park. "Bring a drawing," he responded in less than a minute. "I'll be there." She put her phone in her apron pocket. At closing time, she counted the till. The first day numbers in the expansion section were what she'd projected and slightly better, which was the best kind of slightly. She locked the front, wiped down the machines, turned off the ambient lights, and left the working lights on in the back, the way she always did. She sat at the corner table. She'd never done that before, not with intention. She'd sat there the night she'd asked him to leave so she could think, and that had been necessity. This was different. She sat in the chair he'd been sitting in for 6 months, and she looked at the cafe from his angle, the counter, the door, the bar. Maisie's high stool empty now, the window along the new section going dark with the evening coming on. She understood, sitting there, what he'd found in it. The specific piece of a place that required nothing of you except to be present. Where the worst version of yourself had no power over anyone because nobody knew what the worst version was. Where the coffee was good and the light was warm, the person across the counters was loving proof that something could be built from nothing and stay standing. She sat there for a while. Then she picked up her jacket and her bag, and she locked up and walked home. On the kitchen table, where she'd left her personal mail, was a small package she hadn't opened yet. She opened it now. Inside was a card and a small framed thing. She turned it over. It was a pressed botanical print, mounted simply, the kind of thing you found in proper stationery shops. On the card, in the cramped, precise handwriting, for the new section. If you want it. She looked at the print. It was a harbor plant. Something that grew at the water's edge. She set it on the table. She thought about the note she'd given him that morning. She'd written it late the night before, when Maisie was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table where she made all her real decisions, and she'd written it in the deliberate way. She wrote things she actually meant. You asked me once what this place was. I told you what my grandmother said about safe places. That was true, but it wasn't complete. It was also the thing I built, so I could prove I didn't need to be rescued. I need you to know that's still true. And I need you to know that it doesn't prevent anything else from being true at the same time. L. She picked up the botanical print. She carried it to the cafe the next morning and hung it in the new section, on the wall beside the window she'd fought 3 weeks for. It was slightly off-center, which she susted twice and then left slightly off-center because perfect symmetry in a place built by imperfect hands was the wrong aesthetic. It looked right there. Roman came in at 7:45. He saw it. He stood still for a moment at the door. Then he came to the counter. She had his Americano ready. He reached the counter and picked up the cup, and instead of moving toward his table, he stayed where he was, standing at the counter, looking at her. I read the note, he said. I know, she said. I want to say something back. All right, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the operational pause or the precision pause, but something different. Pause of someone who had spent a long time being careful with words and was now trying to be careful with them in a different direction. I didn't come back here to be rescued either, he said. I came back because this is the only place I've sat still in 20 years. And the reason it was the only place was you. He stopped. I don't know what I'm building now. I know what I had, and I know I gave most of it up, and I know that what's left is less than what was, and also better. I know that. He looked at the cup. I don't have a structure to offer you. I don't have an empire. I have a considerable amount of consulting fees, and one good attorney and a coloring book obligation. Coloring book obligation, she said. Maisie told me yesterday that Marcus needs a backstory session, he said. I've been given a week. Laurel looked at him across the counter. Outside, the rain was doing its persistent thing. A bus went by. Crossword Man was approaching the door with his newspaper under his arm, which was a detail she registered because she registered all the details of her own place. This was hers, and she knew every rhythm of it. Came around the counter. She didn't do it dramatically. She just came around to his side and stood next to him. And they stood together in the cafe for a moment, side by side, looking at the space she'd built, the original section, and the new section, and the corner table, and the high stool, and the botanical print slightly off-center on the wall. He put his hand on the counter beside hers, not over it. Beside it. She put her hand over his. The crossword man pushed through the door, nodded at them both, in the way of someone who has observed the world long enough to recognize a thing when it's finally arrived, and went to his chair. Laurel went back behind the counter. She made his coffee. She brought it to him without being asked. He sat down. He opened his newspaper. Maisie came in at 8:15 with Donna, coloring book under her arm, dragon-related business to transact. She climbed the high stool. She opened to Marcus's page. She looked at Roman in his corner. Backstory session, she announced. I know, he said from behind the newspaper. I've been preparing. You can't prepare for backstory, Maisie said. It comes from your gut. He lowered the newspaper slightly and looked at her over the top of it. Where did you hear that? Mom says it about everything, Maisie said, and turned back to her coloring. Laurel, behind the counter, did not look up. She was making change for a customer and calibrating the grinder and writing down a table order and doing the 6 things simultaneously that her life required her to do at any given moment. She was not looking up, but she was smiling. And the rain came down outside on the city that had watched her build something from nothing, that had watched her refuse to be diminished and refuse to be rescued and refuse to let surviving be the end of the story. And Morning Harbor held its warmth against the gray, outside, the way it always had, the way she had made it to do, from the beginning, because she had known from the beginning what people needed. One safe place, before and after everything, hers.